So getting right back to it, let's kind of get rid of this whiteboard for now and head right into the application. The first thing that we're probably going to have to do is create a new file. We're going to call it view.html for now to signify that this is the view for an individual listing. And the best way to probably start off when we're building just single pages is to copy what we have over so far and link the two files together so that it's easy to go back and forth. So for our purposes, we're going to link the first listing to the view.html file. We won't do it to all the others because it's a bit of a pain to do so, and it's not really necessary. We just want to go back and forth between one. And as well, we also want to link the little logo. We want it to link to our home page, and I've already done that here. So I added an href to the index.html, and that copied over very well into the view.html when I copied it over there. So if I refresh the page, okay, now this link goes to index, this goes to view. Okay, this might not be very clear because the pages are basically identical. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to delete the contents of this page just to make it a little bit more clear. So that's me deleting basically the carousel and all this other content to only leave the navigation and the footer. So refreshing that, now we have something like this. Don't worry, we'll fix this. And if we go back to index, then back to view, back to index, and back to view. So the first thing we got to do is we got to create some spacing between the navigation and basically all of our content. So the ideal way to do this is to make something very abstract. So I'm going to create a div of class called content wrapper. Usually wrappers are just kind of an abstract name to say, okay, I'm wrapping this in some sort of div and I'm applying some sort of generic rules. My personal rule of thumb is a wrapper is some kind of spacing class. So I have a content wrapper here, I apply the class selector, and I give it a margin top of, we'll say, 40 pixels. Now we're not going to see the immediate effect of that until we have some sort of content in there. So for our purposes, let's just test this out. Okay, so now the other problem that we're having is not so much that the spacing is not there. The spacing is there, but it's not centered. So we want to wrap that as well in a container. And we'll just add that in real quick. Let's see how that looks now. That looks a lot better. That actually looks much, much better. There might be some spacing issues at the bottom, and in fact, if we wanted to fix that, we may also add a margin bottom so that you have a bit more focus on the content. So now that we have the spacing allowed or created, now we need to create these blue boxes. So somewhere where we'll house all of our content and somewhere we'll house our inquiry. So let's do that. And this is where the grid system comes in. So we know that the blue should be in its own row because this is within the greater black box. So we're going to create a new row here that's going to house these two forms of content, the details and the inquiry. So let's create a new row for that. And I'm actually going to do some commenting in my code to make it very, very clear. So I'm going to just write, okay, this is the main content. And then we're going to have two splits. We're going to have the details. And we're going to say div class call LG9 to make it 3/4 of the page. And then I'll have the inquiry. Div class call LG3. Cool. So that's done. Now let's keep going. So what's next? The next part is to have the picture and the details. And then below that should be another row. So if the picture is too long, it should still create this gap here, if this is too short, to create a fully defined row for where all the features are located. So I want to create two rows. So we're going to have the intro details. We're going to have that as a div class equals row. And then we're going to have our features. That's also another row. Now, within the intro, we have a split in between, not half-half, but somewhere in like 3/5 and 2/5, where the picture dominates. So I may want to have, let's say, the picture and the text. We'll just have some abstract names. I suggest you be a little bit more specific so it's a little bit easier to navigate, but for the purposes of our demonstration, we don't necessarily have to be. Now let's go here and make some, let's call this the div class alg 7, so that it's a little bit greater than half but not too great. And then for our text, we're going to assign it a column length, a width of 5. And so that's gonna basically set up that part of the grid. And then we have our tables, which are split evenly. So within the features, we just want to have a table 1, even split, div class alg6. And then we'll call it table 2. And that, I mean, really, this code, so if I refresh, we've literally made no progress. We've basically removed text from our page. But what we've done is we've basically played the role of an architect and laid out our plan. We've laid out the blueprints for our page such that now we can actually add content, right? So all of this falls in accordance with our basic plan. We've put it into the HTML, and now it's time to actually fill that up with the information that the user is actually going to see. So let's start with the picture. Let's make a very simple thumbnail and put our house in there. Image source equals image house.jpg. Oops, I'm getting a little bit carried away there. So if we refresh that, cool, it's taking up a prominent part of the page. We're not getting a lot of that relative implication, so let's just keep moving forward. Within the text, we probably want to have the address as the most prominent text, so put Sarnia Road there. Then below that, we can add a paragraph element that can give some information on, for example, the date that this was posted. How recent is this post? Now, we want to kind of bold the more generic text, and one way to do that through HTML is to use the strong element. And then we want to say, let's say March 25th, or let's say Saturday, March 25th at 10:49 p.m. Cool. And then lastly, we might want to have some description text. So maybe the person wants to say some stuff about the house. Now, rather than me doing this manually and typing out some stuff for you guys on the screen, I actually want to go and generate some dummy text. So the most popular form of dummy text is called lorem ipsum. So if you Google that, you'll find the Lipsum generator, lipsum.com, and you can generate a whole bunch of generic text that you can use to kind of see how text responds or how text looks on your application. And Lipsum is good because it almost looks realistic. So we don't want too long of a text. I'll just pick these first two sentences here and paste them over. Cool. Now let's see how this looks. So it's really compelling the way that we're moving about this, because as you can see, the page is actually really like it's already taking shape, and given the architecture that we've already put in place, it's kind of doing so in a very natural way. Moving on to the feature side of things, let's create a table and add some Bootstrap classes. We're going to make it a border table. And within our table, we want to have a couple of rows of features. Now, I'm going to kind of just go on a whim with some of the features that I've come up with. The first is, okay, well, is there internet? We say included, because this is a super house. Let's make a couple more features. So, for example, are there utilities? Utilities are also included. Now, is it furnished? No, you probably have to do some furnishing yourself. Let's add another table of features to kind of continue this mix. There won't be as many features on this half because I've basically run out of ideas at this point. So let's do units. We mentioned there were 4 units. And lastly, the price per month is $600. Cool. So that's got our features. Let's see how that looks. Very neat. Looks really well organized. Now we got to do this inquiry part. So for that, to kind of distinguish it, much like we did with our filter form, in fact, the consistency in having places where data is inputted using a well is actually pretty compelling, because you train something in the user. So for example, I have a well here, where I want to input information. I have a well here where I input information. The user's going to like that because they're going to know, okay, I go to this slightly grayed out area to put in information. But that's a very subtle design point. So in terms of this inquiry listing, upon further thought, perhaps a 75 and 25% split is no good. Because if I want to send an email, then I might want to write in some text, and maybe I want a little bit more than just 25% of the width. So let's see what happens if I make this the length of 4 columns, and I make this guy the length of 8. You'll see, and this is what's really great about Bootstrap, that pretty much all of the other subgrids automatically adjust to meet these constraints. And that's where inheriting between grids becomes really, really compelling. So now that this looks a lot more spacious, a lot more room for content, so we can proceed accordingly. Man, I did the Notes app thing again. Here we go. So with the well, we'll start with the title, inquire about this listing. And just as we did with the filter form, we start with a form element. We'll create a couple of form groups where we'll have our input. Then we'll make a little line and create an input of type submit. We'll give it a button style class. And we'll give it a value. So it's not just the word submit, but so that it writes the word, for example, send inquiry. A more semantic, much more meaning to the call to action. Within an individual form group, I think with each email we have to send 3 things. Our email, the subject line, and some content. So we're going to create those 3 inputs. So we'll say your email, input of type text, class equals form control to make sure it's constrained, and we'll give it a unique ID, inquire email. Cool. So we know we're going to have 3 forms of inputs. So here we'll put subject, inquire subject, and here we're going to put contents. So let's see how that looks. Okay, so that's pretty compelling. I think we're almost done here. The only thing that we're really missing is I think this is not enough room for an actual contents blurb. We should use another type of input called a text area. So that just gives you more lines to work with. So the way you define a text area is with the text area tag. And then here we should put a class called form control and give it an ID, inquire contents. And now I think we're pretty much done. In fact, the user, if they need more space, they can actually resize this in their whim and the page automatically adjusts accordingly. I think we should also do something cool here. Let's see what happens if we resize the page and really see how Bootstrap makes our page more responsive. Well, as you can see, if the grid's starting to take up too much space, it's actually going to collapse it in order to fit the page, and everything works pretty seamlessly. Maybe this contents might need some work, but that's okay. On first page load, it should adapt accordingly, excuse me. There we go. I think one way to fix that is we could actually write inquire contents, resize, text, text area resize property. It should be able, text area dot, oh, resize is none. Okay, so that was correct. Resize, none. My intuition was correct, but Sublime Text kind of led me on. And see, now this little toggle is gone, and we can completely, yeah, and now it scales perfectly. And really, that's the bulk of our view page. And why it took so much faster than it did to build any of our other pages is as we became accustomed with the grid system and became familiar with Bootstrap's controls, making future pages became really, really fast. The last page that we're going to do is our contact page. You're not really required to look at this video, but we are going to be using the contact page when we do the Django component later on. So looking forward to that.